Hey folks, it's almost 6 o'clock. We're just waiting for our mediator, our chair to come into the meeting. And I've been notified by Chris Campbell, he is unable to attend tonight. So it'll be just the 6th. And so I'll just wait a few more minutes for Tim Stegman, our chair, to get here.
Sean's asking to make sure that we can hear him. I told him we could not. Unless it's just me.
I'm sorry, who?
Sean,
I didn't hear anything from Sean, no.
How about now?
yes, sir.
Cool, thanks.
Well, I don't see Tim coming, so I think we'll just get started. If he happens to come, he can take over for us. So for the committee members, I did just get out the council or the committee minutes. If we want to skip that item for next time, or we can do so, because I know this really isn't much time for you to have reviewed it. So at this point, I'm going to call the meeting to order, noting that Chris Campbell is unable to attend with us tonight. So we have here our approval of agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll motion to approve.
Good.
Second by Randy Van Wynen. All those in favor say aye.
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 And does the committee want to wait on the minutes until later or next time?
I think that would be appropriate.
All right, then moving along, we still have our discussion topics as we laid out in our first meeting. And the first one is lifeguards, past practices and current state. At our last meeting, we did have a request to understand why did the city get decommission the lifeguard program, if you will, back in the 2000s. And so staff put together a timeline of those events, and I'll have Griffin Graham, the assistant city manager, go ahead and kind of summarize what we have found. Again, we do have public comment, so if there is someone who wants to raise their hand or put *9, we'll get through the report, take some committee comments, and then look for some public comment on that. So Griffin, if you want to walk through the report. All right, let me get to there. All right.
Thanks, Kate. Appreciate the opportunity, everyone. I'm hoping you all had an opportunity to review the staff report that was included in the meeting packet. If it's okay with everyone, I will share it on the screen here for just a minute so I can highlight a few key parts. Let me see if I can get everything organized. Is everyone able to see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So staff spent some time since the last beach safety committee going through a number of old records, documents, and particularly meeting minutes associated with the eventual decision to discontinue the lifeguard program in 2001. Before I highlight the timeline, I am going to jump to the end real quick just to point out we did try to provide as much support material as we can. These various documents are noted by letter at various points throughout the report, and then these documents were also included later in the packet for your reference. With that being said, staff spent time since the last meeting compiling a timeline that really at the end shows the process city council and the city took over many years, approximately 1996 to 2001, discussing, reviewing, and then eventually making a decision regarding the lifeguard program. Following 2001, there's additional notable material that was included in meeting minutes and various documents that I'd like to draw your attention to that I think really highlights the city's effort to continuously evaluate and evolve the beach safety program. And then at the end of the timeline, I would just like to note that these are additional changes that were made at various points in time since May of 2007 up to present regarding notable changes to the beach safety program, concluding with action in 2020 when this committee was established. And here we are now. We also attempted to summarize some of the notable factors that were influential in City Council's eventual decision to discontinue the lifeguard program. My understanding through reviewing these materials is there was no one specific factor, but instead a combination of various factors that led to their eventual decision. We also tried to briefly note a few new factors that really made 2020 an exceptional year in a number of ways. And to just conclude with the support materials, as well as brief statements on how it's important, I think, to all of us that we're continuing to evaluate all options when it comes to the city's beach safety program. So with that, Kate, I'll turn it back over to you, or I'm happy to do the best I can to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Griffin. If you might want to stop the screen share, I guess we'll just take any comments or concerns from the committee first.
Is it possible at some point to get a breakout of what changes or updates to the beach safety program occurred and when?
We've been looking in that, Cam. I know that you asked for that. I think at our first meeting, what we have found is that really the updates have been just to either the beach flag system itself or just new photos. So we did have some new equipment photos that were inserted at various times.
Okay. The reason I bring that up is because I know that Griffin just mentioned that, the program has evolved over time. But in looking at the timeline, if you're not attending this meeting and looking at it afterwards, it seems to suggest we had all of those factors in place and in 2007. As my understanding, we didn't add the beach flag system or the emergency phones until around 2013. So just wanted to call that out.
Cam, I think you're absolutely correct. I think the program's evolved since 2017, and really, if anything, that list of changes are just intended to show that since that time, the program's continued to be evaluated and evolve. I apologize if there's confusion, but no, it's not intended to show those all occurred in 2007. There's been a continuous evolution, if you will, of the program since it was originally established.
One other quick note on the timeline and specifically on the beach safety program, would it not make sense to also include precipitating factors in any of these changes? It's my understanding that the settlement of a lawsuit actually brought about some of the changes that are in place now with the program. And the reason I bring that up is because we should be considering the costs of lawsuits and those types of things if we're talking about liability and costs when looking at a lifeguard program as well.
The Marty Jordan beach safety program did come out of the lawsuit that was for the unfortunate death of Mr. Jordan, I believe in 2009. There have been some things that were already on the beaches at that point, and so it was put together as a beach safety program, a plan that's now on the city's website. And many of the things that are in there have either been in the works or were part of a program that the city put together. But the Marty Jordan Beach Safety Plan is on there, and I don't think it's, we can't, of course, say that that's due to Mr. Jordan's unfortunate death, but we put together that safety plan to kind of show that we are committed to the safety of the beaches. Is there any other comment from the board or the, the safety committee?
I've got plenty. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, good. Sorry, I had to kind of use some alternate mic. This is Sean Russell, former lifeguard since I was pretty young, and then obviously eventually, like I've mentioned before, a supervisor for the program before it ended. Kate, thanks again for setting this up. Griffin, nice to see you in person. I know we talked a few hours ago via or about something else, so good to put a face to the name. Appreciate your work on this. So while I appreciate the work and the information on beachfront safety, much like in the vein of what we've done in previous meetings, I'd like to stay germane to the particular agenda item that we're talking about right now, which is past practices. And again, while I appreciate the info regarding beach safety and focusing a lot about why we got rid of lifeguard programs, the lifeguard program, and although not complete, and I'm happy to spend time, as much time as you want, to give you my perspective on what happened, because I was involved with a lot of it from 1996. I was in front of City Council in 1996 when they tried to eliminate the program the first time. So I have a lot of corporate knowledge from that. But that said, what I'd like to really focus on is the specific agenda item we're on, which is past practices. It's not past reasons why we got rid of the program, but it's past practices. So I'd just like to know, I didn't see a whole lot of information. When you talked about like costs of the program was part of the reason why it was eliminated, and some other things, like what did the program look like and what were the costs?
The information we have on the beach safety program actually come from some of the reports that we've included in the staff report here. Our records for HR items really only go back 7 years. So
Yeah.
what I have in here is what we had gleaned from previous reports to City Council.
Okay. And we'll get to this for current practices, because I know that the city reached out to several individuals and several neighboring communities to find out what they're doing and find out what current practices are. I also didn't see much of that information, but we'll get to that. So when we're talking about past practices, since I'm probably the only one on the board here besides Randy that was involved in water rescue, and I know Randy, your perspective was a little bit different than mine because I was on the beach, and you and I kind of shook hands at the water line as we brought folks to you for you to kind of do your portion and getting them to the hospital. Does anybody have any questions for me? Since again, we're talking about past practices of what the lifeguard program in South Haven that was run for over 40 years looked like. I kind of thought that might be a little bit of the answer. So I'm just going to jump right in and take a little bit of time to describe the program, because I think that's important. If that's the agenda item about past practices, that we talk about what it looked like. And again, I just want to emphasize the point that I think it's very interesting that we took until now over 2 months to get to lifeguards, and there's no real interest in finding out what we did and what the lifeguard program actually looked like. So I'll take a minute to talk about it. And some of this is from before my time, so I apologize for the information that might be a little bit from memory and from corporate knowledge that was passed down. But prior to 1996, the lifeguard program basically for almost 40 years, and it was on and off where there was some changes in there, but it basically was run with 2 lifeguard towers, one on North Beach and one on South Beach. And that was manned by anywhere from 3 to 4 lifeguards, and they pretty much did the whole beach. That was relayed to me from somebody that was all the way back in the 60s that did lifeguards at the time. And I was a lifeguard starting in 1989. In the mid 90s, we had a situation where a local drowned, and it kind of precipitated the conversation of, hey, what are lifeguards doing exactly? If we've got somebody that drowned on our beach, are they really effective? What's going on here? And it was brought to light pretty quickly that, hey, we're trying to guard a beach that's several hundred feet long with 1 lifeguard tower. And how is that even effective or fair to these folks? So at that point is when the city looked at it a little closer and decided, yeah, we need some more towers. If we're going to do this, we need to do this right. And about that time is when it expanded into 3 lifeguard towers on the North Beach to cover the beach, and 4 lifeguard towers on the South Beach, for a total of 7 lifeguard towers. We also plussed up from that point from about 6 full-time lifeguards for the summer to between 15 and 18 lifeguards, some of which were part-time, to cover all the shifts. We also expanded the hours slightly at that point, and per the city's request for budget and kind of how that was working at the time, because it was the 90s, we also went from guarding the beach from the entire hours that we were there to basically being sent home on rain days. So unlike years prior where lifeguards would stay there regardless, rain, shine, storms, it didn't matter. In that the late 90s there, we went to basically going to like on call if it was raining. So that's kind of how it looked, basically 7 lifeguard towers, about 15 to 18 guards. Now costs, I've heard costs. I read through the packet. I saw a lot of information about how much we brought in with beach parking and how much we lost, but I never saw anything specific about lifeguard costs. So I'll tell you what the lifeguard costs were, since I ran the program and I paid the bill, or I arranged to pay the bill. Clearly the city paid the bill. Actually, before I cover that though, I want to make sure everybody that's on the line, and for the record, that it's clear that when beach parking was passed, it was specifically passed for beach improvements and for funding lifeguards. That's in the minutes. You can look it up. You can see why that is actually being charged. And to my knowledge, it's never been discussed or changed formally or brought back to the public as to, hey, we're still charging them money, but we're not providing that same service. Specifically about the lifeguard or about the beach parking. And then as far as the cost, it was approximately $80,000. I've got some notes I was able to dig up. They're pretty old and it's a pretty rough cost, but I can kind of do the math on what I remember that we paid. And just so you know, what we paid was slightly above minimum wage for our lifeguards, the starting lifeguards. Our head guards were paid about $1.50 more. And then I ran the program and made about $1 more than that. I think my wage was around 10 and a half bucks or something like that to run the program. So it gives you an idea that folks that did this, Randy had asked the question when we talked a couple weeks ago, Mr. Van Wynen, why did your guards, or why did you guys even do that job? Like, you literally are out there in the sun all day doing that job. Like, what were you doing for that kind of money? And as any rescuer knows, it certainly wasn't about the money. These young kids that were very effective at their job took a lot of pride in what they did, and they really went home every night knowing that they made a difference. So that's why we did the job. And it was nice to have a couple extra dollars too, although it would have been nice, like Randy has mentioned, for it to be a little more on par with the job they were doing. So that's kind of what the program looked like as far as the setup. And I can talk more if you have questions and want to know why 7 towers, because it was very specific. As I looked over Randy's information that he provided, it's a fantastic, Cadillac program that I love for a lot of reasons, for pay and for, the equipment and whatnot. It's awesome. And he certainly knows what he's doing when it comes to rescue. However, there's also a lot of gaps there with why we had 7 towers, where we put them, response times. I mean, this wasn't something that somebody just threw out there and said, oh, we want to hire 18 guys, so we need 7 towers. It was thought out. It was measured. It was constantly evaluated. Every year, the towers were placed in different locations depending on how the beach looked. And as most of you guys know, what our beach looks like this year is much different than it looked like 5 years ago. So that's kind of what it looked like. And then just briefly, I'd like to just take a minute. I know I'm taking a lot of time, but I kind of feel like this is the lifeguard time. So we're going to talk about lifeguard stuff. And that is basically to go over what the lifeguards did, because there was a lot of conversation in previous meetings about how we're going to solve these problems. And I pretty much wasn't allowed to bring up the lifeguard word during those meetings because everybody said, hey, we're not talking about lifeguards. We're going to get to it. You'll have your chance. So I guess this is the chance. Kate, I know I kind of stretched on for a couple minutes there. I'll take a quick break just because I don't want to monopolize. Are you good as the stand-in moderator that I go into what that lifeguard program did?
I don't see why not, Sean. Is there any question or comment from the board for right now?
Oh, it's good information. I say carry on, Sean.
Okay, feel free to jump in and stop me. I know it's a little awkward. Yes, sir.
Did not the city pass over the responsibility for lifeguards to the school system?
Fantastic question. Yeah. So again, some of this I have to go from my memory because, I'll admit, and I've told Cam this, in a lot of ways I feel responsible for where the lifeguard program is today, because I was in my mid-20s and pretty immature and didn't write a lot of stuff down then like I could have. That's a perfect example of why it probably always should have been nested under something like the fire department, where we would have had good training and mentoring and reasons why you document things. Although we did document quite a bit, but that piece of it, as corporate knowledge serves, it originally started from when I was a young guard in high school. It was part of the community recreation program that was run out of the high school. And my understanding, as it was run by Mr. Vidmar at the time, was because he was kind of tied in with the lifeguard program at the pool. And it was kind of a natural tie-in for lifeguards that were there and how we were mentored. I have said before, I was very much groomed from a young age to kind of figure out if I was going to be a beach guard. And I came up in that program under community rec. That was transferred from the community rec program and them running it and paying it and managing it under Mike Vidmar to the city. There was a gap in there where I didn't work the program in the early 90s. And I believe that's when it transferred to the city, as I remember, because when I came back in the mid 90s, 95, 96 timeframe, and we were getting ready to lose the program again, That was my understanding, that it transferred to the city at that point, and it remained with the city until it was canceled in 2000 or 2001. My last year on the program as the beachfront coordinator was my title at the time, working under Robin Abshire, was the summer of 2000. And that was only half of the summer, because the gentleman that I turned it over to after 99, I ran it full time for several years after Bob Linderman ran it. And I turned it over to another gentleman who basically had some issues, and I don't remember, let go or something happened there. And I was asked to come on and finish serving the rest of the summer. That was the summer of 2000. And then I shortly took off afterwards for officer training school for the Air Force. So that's kind of where my involvement in the program ended. Although I monitored pretty close as they were looking at shutting down the program and the discussions that happened to get rid of the program, or all the costs, and hey, we can't find lifeguards, those discussions in the spring of 2001. Does that answer your question, Tom?
It does. So the lifeguard program started as a city function, switched over to the school, then switched back to the city.
Yes, and I don't have much knowledge on when it was a city function, other than I just happened to meet lifeguards that were guards in the 60s that came back when I was a guard in the late 80s and the 90s, and they just introduced themselves and said, "Oh yeah, I used to work here," and I guess worked for the city, and kind of how it used to look. But I don't have much other than that for you. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
John, I have a question for you. As far as in the 90s, what was your experience at that time finding lifeguards, finding qualified, should I say, lifeguards?
Yep. Yeah, great question. So qualified obviously means a lot different today than it did then, because there's more programs, there's better training out there. So it's kind of a multifaceted question, but it's a great one. Up until that point, it was very much they didn't just hire anybody up until the mid 90s off the street. It was almost like a groomed, like I said, kind of a mentored thing. A lot of local folks from the swim team programs that were lifeguards in the pool at the high school, folks that were under somebody's thumb, where they really had a lot of chance to see their maturity level, how they dealt with things. They purposely put you in situations in high school at the pool to see how you're going to react. And you were kind of groomed into those positions. So there was like a natural flow and a passing of the baton that happened, where I'd say probably 3/4 of our guards at that time, up until that time, were local folks. Now there were some odds and ends Chicago folks that came in and applied. There were some folks from surrounding communities that applied. All of them, as far as qualifications, all of them were certified as a certified lifeguard. There was no real beach open water program that was being taught, at least in the area at the time, formally, like by Red Cross or anything like that, but we were all Red Cross lifeguard certified. So, and that basically means pool, and I think at the time maybe inland lakes, which, as you know, is quite different than obviously Lake Michigan. It's really more like the ocean in a lot of ways. So the way they mitigated that, both historically and the way we carried on when I took over from the 90s, and even with some input from a company that was hired. I apologize, I didn't write it down, but we had a person come in who was an advisor, basically, to do additional training. And they actually coordinated. They were the first ones really to coordinate with the fire department, to bring the fire department and Randy's folks down with us. That's kind of where we got the idea after this guy came in. It was basically a beachfront test. So you basically, just to qualify, you had to be a certified Red Cross lifeguard. And then you took a test in the pool, mainly because it's Michigan and you can't test in Lake Michigan in March, right? Or April. So we tested in the pool. And I can tell you the test, pretty rigorous. I mean, it's probably one of the toughest physical tests I've taken. Just, way more than just a pool rescue. I mean, they really went into detail about what you're going to deal with when you get out there by yourself, and how you're going to be tired, and basically have somebody that's potentially fighting you like a true rescue. They all they want to do is breathe. So they don't care if you're there to help them. They're trying to crawl over you. So they did a great job simulating that. Once you pass that test, and that was kind of the second gate after the interview and the application, CPR certification, all that good stuff, Red Cross. You did the pool test, and then you were brought down to the beach, and you were basically on the beach as a junior guard or a temporary guard. You're on probation to see how you did on the beach. And as soon as it warmed up, that involved a lot of real world rescue training on both beaches. Back when I first started in the late 80s, it was you were assigned to one beach or the other. You were a South Beach guard or you were a North Beach guard. And Randy, if you remember, anybody who was back then, North Beach was the cool beach. You know, that was where all the cool kids hung out, and you know the older high school kids in college, and that's where you wanted to be. The South Beach was where you got to start, so that's where I got to start because that was the family beach at the time. But the training was the same. You were out in the water, and a lot of times what we would do, the senior guards being experienced, whenever we would red flag the beach, we would be out there training as lifeguards. So if it was a very rough day where we weren't allowing people to swim, or we red flagged part of the beach because it was too rough with structural currents next to the pier, that's when we'd go out and train. And we would kidding train in the water that we were basically telling other people they can't swim in. Much like Randy will tell you, I'm sure, that you know, they tell people not to go into a burning building, but they train to do that all the time because they need to know how to do it. So that's exactly how we looked at it. And we did everything from rough water training and rescues with multiple victims, all the way to bodyboarding, spinal injuries, or you know, simulated spinal injuries from jumping off the pier and landing headfirst on the rocks. And we did that in anywhere from 2 to 4 foot waves to bring them in and stay, you know, do a spine stabilization to get them to the, as best we could, to get them to the beach. So that's kind of what the training looked like up until the mid 90s. And then we just kind of carried that through. It was somewhat more formalized with the gentleman who brought the training into us in the mid 90s. And we did the same process basically. Where we ran into problems is we didn't have quite the corporate pass down like we did in years before with swim teams and local folks and whatnot. And a big reason for it that we said at the time was there was a pay issue. I mean, folks were not really willing to come down and sit in the sun all summer for minimum wage or $1 more than that. And that obviously drove getting some of the younger kids. But I would say, truthfully, hiring was never an issue. I keep reading that in these minutes that are provided. And I can tell you firsthand that hiring and staffing was not an issue until the very late 90s. That's kind of when it started to come apart. Now, did we, I don't even think this was brought in your minutes, Griffin, that you worked on. But one thing I can tell you that we always fought, absolutely, was at the beginning and the end of the season, particularly the end of the season, how to keep lifeguards on duty when they're going back to college or going back to high school, college in particular, because those are the guys that we really relied on to be the workhorses. They were the leaders. They were the ones that were mature. They took the young guards under their wing and did what they did. The way we started to mitigate that in the late 90s, if you look at some of the notes that were made on what Griffin did provide, is we provided an end of year bonus. If they stayed, we would give them like an extra $1 an hour for all the hours that they worked to try and keep them. So that's kind of broad strokes. I know it's a lot, but I do want you to know, because you asked the question, and it's a fantastic question, that the resources out there right now between Dave, who's online with Great Lakes Surf Rescue Project, and also we've got, I see several of the folks that the city reached out to that run other programs in cities all the way over to Illinois on Lake Michigan. They have fantastic resources with training, with how to set the program up as far as operations, staffing. I mean, it's unbelievable if I would have had those resources 25 years ago. What else?
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. It looks like our mediator chair, Stegman, is here. So if you can jump right into the meeting, that'd be great. It looks like also we have some, at least one hand up. If there's no other comments from the committee here, I'll have Mr. Adam Abajan. I'll ask you to unmute and go ahead and state your comment. You've got 3 minutes there.
Thank you. No, actually, first I just had a question. You had mentioned that I saw the document that you presented showed the reasons you guys canceled this program and what advancements you did make since then. What were the drownings prior for the 10 years prior to canceling the program? What are the drownings numbers that the 20 years since? How successful, how have you gauged your efficacy of the cancellation of the lifeguard program and its successes? You've obviously made some steps along the way, some of them really good ones. The signage is great. at points, and you've done some great things, but how are you determining whether or not it's been successful?
Can we allow Sean to speak to the success or the struggles with the program in past?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Kate, if that's okay, can I just, if I can take that comment germane to the past program, I can talk to that. And then if somebody wants to talk about what's happened since 2001, I think Griffin, you collected some of that, Cam. I know you spent a lot of time on that. I'd be happy to do what I can for the program that I was involved in prior to 2000.
Please do.
Okay. So when I was a lifeguard, like I said, the entire time, and there were gaps, so Randy could kind of fill in some of these, but the entire time I was a lifeguard, from the 90s, a gap, and then into the 80s, slight gap, and then back into the 90s until 2000, we had one drowning. It was a local gentleman. Still hard to see he was a twin. So it's still kind of hard to see his brother around town and know that, that's one that we just didn't do as good as we probably could have. However, I understand that in 2000, the summer of 2000, at some point there was another drowning. I wasn't the guard at the time. I wasn't a supervisor. Randy might be able to talk a little bit more to that one. I think it was on North Beach, but I can tell you in all those years that I was a lifeguard, we had one. And I have since talked with a lot of the lifeguards prior, the Pettit family, the Whitcup family, et cetera, et cetera. These are all names that locals know that were lifeguards on our beaches, and they can't remember a drowning. What they do remember is hundreds upon hundreds of assists and things that probably could have went wrong. And even more importantly, what they relate to me and wanted me to relate to you most is everything else we've talked about thus far, with signage and warnings and, dogs on the beach and alcohol and fights and the big fight we had 3 years ago on the beach and all these things that they were involved in. And they really wanted you to know how much of a force multiplier they were and the great relationship they had with the police and the fire department to basically keep those guys doing what they do best, and off the beach until we absolutely needed them. You didn't have police officers walking the beach just looking for stuff, because the lifeguards were right there with a radio they were the force multiplier. That's what we call it in a military term. I'm sure you've heard it before, but it was just so effective. So that's kind of what we did. And I know it's a roundabout way of answering your question, Adam. That's the information I have. Yes, we had drownings while there was lifeguards. I don't remember it being anything like the last 18 months or 2 years or so. That's what I have for you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Griffin, do you want to take the question? Otherwise, we can go to, it looks like we have 3 more hands up and we can take another question.
I can do the best I can. I think the short answer is I don't have the specific data related to the number of drowning deaths since the program was eliminated in 2001. What I do know, and Mr. Russell, what I think I'll just note is, highlighting the last 18 months, I think can be challenging. As we know, there's been some exceptional factors to the 18 months that have made it a particularly bad season for drownings across the state.
I would agree. Yep. But if you want to talk, sorry, Cam, I didn't mean to cut you off. I do want to
fine.
address that specifically because there was 4 of them, right, in South Haven over the last 18 months. Obviously, we all know their names and we're all heartbroken. Yeah, that's a tough one. But I would be more than willing to look at each of those. And I know for a fact 3 of those, I have a hard time, I guess, really, as a lifeguard and someone that spent thousands of hours on those beaches, attributing those drownings to what I saw in the packet, i.e. high water and some of those things. And I'd be glad to go with them. I don't want to waste everybody's time right now, but I would love to sit down with Randy or any of the other experts and talk, or Adam, the other lifeguards, and talk about specifically those instances and why I don't believe they were high water related. They were certainly population related and the amount of people that we've had in our beaches in the last few years compared to 10 or 15, 20 years ago, without a doubt. But some of the things I saw in the packet with high water and those things, I would probably beg to differ as somebody with lifeguard experience.
I will add too that I know of 2 additional drownings. So in addition to the 3 in 2020, the 1 in 2019, there was Marty Jordan's drowning in 2009, and then another gentleman drowned in 2006.
Thank you, Cam. I will take another question. Annie Brown, I'll ask you to go ahead and unmute. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you. So I just want some clarification on the number of people who drowned after the lifeguards were stopped or discontinued. Was it 6?
To the best of my knowledge, Annie, it's been 6.
Thank you.
And just to confirm that, Cam, that's 6 in 20 years?
It's 6 from 2006 forward.
Okay. Did you have any of the numbers from 2000 to 2006?
No, I don't. I had a hard time finding that. That's one of the downfalls of not having lifeguards to keep track of those types of things. But additionally, I only found the one drowning during guarded years, and that was the twin that Sean referenced. And it's my understanding too, Sean, that there's an asterisk on that. Still heartbreaking, but an asterisk in that it was on a portion of the beach that wasn't actively guarded at that point. And then his drowning death is what increased the number of towers. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's, sorry, go ahead, Randy. I know you got a lot of corporate knowledge here.
Well, no, I was just gonna say, I was deposed one time on this, just what we're talking about right now. And that's always been the problem. There's no real data. We never kept data, and now is when you pay for it. You know,
Right.
Either for or against, whatever. And we had the same problem in fire service. And once the state said we had to use this one computer program, everybody thought, boy, we're going to get everything we ever need. Well, you still don't. You still don't get good data. And that's the hard part, because, well, when I was talking to you the other day, trying to pick my brain, going back, I only remember 2 on the city property, 2 on the city beaches. And that's when we had guards. And that's why I wanted to ask you if we had guards at that time, and we did.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's just so now we see what happens when we don't keep good records. I know I drove everybody crazy at Shays, but without having that stuff, you never really know where you need to go or how you can improve.
We're spending a lot of time focusing on drowning deaths. Can we put any numbers at all to saves? I know that the same problem. I personally know, because all of my friends were lifeguards, that we did have lifeguards called in after hours by the police department to help with some, and I know of one saved that way, but I don't know if we have any numbers on any other saves during that time.
Well, and the other thing, Cam, is it's not just saves. We should have broke it down from assists to actual saves, to drownings, to injuries, all kinds of data, but it's not there. I mean, and it wasn't kept years ago neither.
Right.
That's why, well, one of the reasons, not the main, that's why we lost Coast Guard stations, same thing.
Yep. Randy, you are so spot on. And that's probably, Cam knows this. It's the thing that really drives me the most, is I feel so responsible, and that, I was young. I realized I was young. I didn't have the forethought to think of, the importance of documenting like that. I was excited to be a lifeguard and excited to run it. But I got to tell you, that's probably one of my biggest reasons why I think, whether it falls under the fire department or somehow, with the material that's out there that I'm sure Adam and Dave and those guys can provide, is that's all there, that mentorship and that way to run a program is now codified. I mean, I was literally in the process of writing my own manual when I left for the OTS in the summer of 2000 when I took over for that other gentleman, because I realized that once I was gone, unless there was somebody else to carry on by word of mouth, basically, of what we did and how we did it. And we had some templates for training and stuff and for testing, of course, you know, there were standards. But as far as just the overall operations and how we dealt with your department, the fire department, or the police, and how we trained our guys to, you know, it was just such a mentorship program to learn how to do that effectively. I wish I would have been better at capturing that 20 years
Well,
ago.
you weren't responsible. Don't feel responsible because you're not.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, but
That nobody was responsible. We all did. That's how everything operated back then. I mean, it just did.
yeah,
Especially when it goes for so long.
yeah.
But yeah. I mean, we give you an idea. We're trying to figure out why an ambulance take longer to get out of a fire station than a big fire truck. And you want to imagine what we came up with and what we found. Biggest one, which you'd probably love in your work, laced boots.
Yeah,
Not good.
yeah.
Takes a long time to lace a boot.
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
just some of the weird things, but
Yeah.
nobody kept those records. Fire
Yeah.
service didn't, you know, so
That's-
that's just the way it was.
It's a great learning tool for sure. Yeah.
Sean, to maybe close the loop on the past practices, could you just quickly run us through what a day looked like for a lifeguard back then?
Yeah, I sure will. I know there's other hands up, but this will help me at least close this portion, Kate, and it won't take me too long. But I just think it's so important when we talk past practices with the agenda item we're on, that so many of the things we've already talked about, I can address, because it basically, it covers a lot. And I was just, as you guys all know, I was really chomping at the bit to talk about the things you guys were addressing, because I didn't hear one problem that we've talked about thus far in the meetings that lifeguards didn't at least make a lot better than it is now. And this is completely separate from drowning. So when we start talking about statistics and drownings and then versus now, as far as I'm concerned, if we spent $200,000, $400,000, whatever it is, and we could save one life, to me, I mean, how is that not worth it, right? It's a pretty clean kill. And I know in today's budget with COVID and whatnot, it's more difficult, but I know a year ago, it would have been a drop in the bucket for South Haven and a small price to pay to give back for our, you know, the reason why everybody comes to South Haven. As I've said before, if that was a cornfield, nobody'd be coming here. So I don't think it's much to commit this as a possible, to at least try it again. So a typical day, back when I ran the program, the guard hours were from 9 to 7, and I kind of what I submitted with kind of an addendum or maybe a little bit of refinement from what Randy submitted as far as the hours and stuff. Cam, I don't know if you had a chance to send that in, but we'll make sure you get it if you haven't. That I basically built what I built for this discussion based on what we ran then and how we ran it. So it was approximately 9 to 7. Was the lifeguards. Like I said, we had 7 towers. Lifeguards would show up in shifts because obviously everybody's not at the beach at 9 o'clock. So those guys, usually 2 would start on each beach. We always like to use the buddy system. So we tried to start with 2, end with 2. And since there was four towers on the South Beach, 3 on the north, we would start with, or there would be 5 guards typically. To cover basically time off and a walker and whatnot, and then 4 or 5 guards on North Beach. The guards, when they would show up in the morning, their job was to walk the beach and check for safety, because as you can imagine, people at night do a lot of crazy stuff, whether it's fireworks or bonfires on the beach that aren't allowed, or dog poop. Alewives back in the day was something. They used to go and spend their first hour, if people weren't in the water actively swimming, cleaning the beach, checking for safety, just basically doing a once over to make sure all of our equipment was good to go and the beach was safe. And they would just kind of prep for the day. Then we typically have 1 or 2 other guards show around the 10:30 time frame. And then the following 2 or 1, just depending on how the schedule worked out. I won't go into crazy detail on that obviously now, but I can show it if anybody wants to see it. Would come in at the midday point, at like the 12 o'clock point. And that's when the first guards would start taking their lunch. And then it would just kind of rotate through. Those guys would come from lunch. The guy that showed up at 10:30 would go for lunch, and on throughout the day. As you can imagine, 11, 12 o'clock is when it started to get real busy. So that's when we like to have as many of the towers populated as we could. And we always typically like to have at least one walker that was just roaming the beach, doing anything from telling folks to, hey, you can't have your dog on the beach, to alcohol's not allowed. And my guys were pretty tactful at the way they could get people to not have alcohol on the beach. I'm pretty confident that the situation we had 4th of July several years ago would have been nipped in the bud way earlier than it was because of our guards being on the beach and seeing that developing. We used to catch people coming down early and trying to bury a keg in the beach in the sand to cover it and have a keg down there all day and thinking that we weren't wiser to it. So they were pretty good at nipping that in the bud and basically trying to help solve it before the cops had to be involved. Their typical workday was a 6.5-hour workday with a half-hour lunch. So basically 3 hours on, lunch period for half hour, and 3 hours on. Part of what I saw with your program, Randy, is, and you mentioned this too when we talked, is it is a very, very difficult job to do with not physically, but keeping your attention on the water for any more than a couple hours. I mean, even an hour at some times, even if you're on an umbrella, you're staring at the water and trying to maintain how many bodies are up there. You're constantly counting and watching people's actions, and you get really good at figuring out what people's body movements are, what's natural and what's not. Dave Benjamin can talk a lot about that. If you ever want to know more, he'll send you information about what a drowning victim looks like. But we got really good at just kind of seeing that and knowing what's normal and what's not. But typically they would be in the towers for no more than 3 hours, a break, and then 3 hours. And they would work 6 days a week with that schedule and one off. Now, keep in mind, they didn't sit in the tower for 3 hours, because you can imagine sitting in the sun, starting if your shift started at noon, sitting in a tower for 3 hours before you get a break. And that's not how it worked. You were typically in a tower for no more than an hour, is what we tried to do, and sometimes less. And we would take the walker and we would just start shifting folks with that walker. So you'd go from a tower to a walker position. Unfortunately, at the time, we were always very cognizant about money, right? That was directed by the city that, hey, if it's a rainy day or people aren't on the beach because there's a storm or whatever, you guys were going home. I personally wasn't a fan of that. My younger guards loved it because a rain day meant they got an extra day off. And these are young kids that are working pretty hard and they just love a day off to go and hang out, even if it was raining. I was not brought up under that program. I worked for Mr. Mike Vidmar, who's also a South Haven resident. And my first year working there for him, it was 6 on, 1 off, and you're 6 on, that you were working regardless. There was no going home if it was raining. At that time, we could park our cars up on the beach or real close to the beach, and he allowed us to get out of the tower so we weren't getting rained on and sit in our car, but we would red flag the beach if we were in our cars. And obviously we did that because it was raining or thundering, lightning, whatever, but we would red flag the beach. And if somebody tried to swim during that red flag, we would get out of our car, blow the whistle, go down there and let them know. A lot of times we'd catch them before they even got to the water because we'd see them parking and thinking they were going to go. But it was very effective, and that's just what I was brought up under. But that's kind of how it ran towards the end and how it morphed into basically the schedule that it became. It was not 9 to 7 when I worked for Mr. Vidmar. I want to say it was more of a, I can't remember if it was like a 10 to 6 or I don't remember exactly. I'd have to go back and look, but that's all up for debate and kind of what we decide is a balance between costs and the best coverage. But clearly, as you guys know, anybody who's been to the beach, the busiest hours are from about 11-ish, just before lunch. You're going to just have max pack beach until about 3 or 3:30, 4 o'clock, folks start packing up and leaving to go do dinner. Those 5 hours are typically your busiest time of the beach. And so we obviously tried to staff accordingly. And then of course, as you would imagine, Friday, Saturday, Sunday are the busiest, along with any holidays that we tried to plus up on staff too. So that's what the day kind of looked like. Sorry.
How deep did you guys put the cans out? Because I know lots of times you had to readjust them.
Yeah, the buoys.
Yeah,
great question. It's actually dictated by our license. If you look at it, the license that we have to submit with the DNR dictates how deep of water that it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And of course they have a lot of rules beyond that. And I mean, we could only do what we can do because we were doing it manually. Like they were basically big cement buckets that usually the lifeguards were the ones that made. We used 5-gallon buckets, put cement in them, and then put an eye bolt in, and that's what we connected them to. And then we walked them out to where we wanted them to be. But it wasn't, we tried to do it based on depth. It was clearly over our head, right? Because people like to swim, they like to go deep. But we always tried to strike a balance between being too deep and there was a time distance that we would always measure how long it would take us to get off the tower to get to that furthest point. If you draw an imaginary line of the buoy line from the pier all the way down to the end, we would basically triangulate and see, okay, that's about the furthest point from this tower and the furthest point from the other tower. And we would try and see how long it would take for us to get to that furthest point. And the time, if I remember, I honestly don't remember exactly. I'd have to look again, but I want to say it was somewhere around 90 seconds to 2 minutes, at the most 2 minutes. But it was no kidding, off the tower all the way out to that deepest point. It might have been a little bit less. We played with it a little bit based on what we were reading as far as folks getting in trouble and whatnot. But the cool part about having lifeguards there is, you know, someone like David probably flip out if I said 2 minutes, right? Because 2 minutes is just too long for somebody who's, you know, inhaling water and drowning. However, we were usually, not usually, I would say 999 times out of 1,000, we're noticing that those folks are struggling even before they notice they're struggling. It was just.
But normally it wasn't a 5 foot or 6 foot of water.
I think it's 8 foot per the designation, but yes, it was over the head and probably more like 7 to 8 feet ish. The reason I know that, Randy, is because when we used to bring the buoys out there, the swim markers, I used to be able to pick up the cement buoy to get it out far enough. I would pick it up and actually carry it and walk on the bottom of the sand. And I wasn't swimming with it, obviously, because it was a cement 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah.
And I used to swim until I could see there was about 2 feet of water or so over my head.
Drop it.
And then we drop it, pop up, and kind of get an idea of the distance. And then we'd always check the distance with response time. So great question.
So the buoys were set to designate the swim area, right?
Yes, sir.
So, because we got into this discussion at our last meeting where the buoys are set to tell the boats how close they can come to shore.
Actually, I didn't want to pipe in, but that's not entirely true. The boats can come right up to the buoys. I don't know if most people know that, but legally they can drop anchor and the boat can actually be bumping into the buoy basically. Per maritime law, there's nothing that says they can't be right up to the buoys. What they can't do, I believe it's 100 or it's 200 feet, that there's a no wake zone. So they can't come blazing by the swim area at, you know, pulling a water skier or something. It's a slow no wake zone up to the buoy line. And then of course, Tom, they can't come into the swim area either.
So the buoys perhaps that we're now setting by current practices are out too far?
That's a hard one for me because I haven't swam them. Are you asking or saying that's your opinion?
Well, I look at a couple of our instances last summer and it was a matter of exhausted swimmers going out to the buoy.
You're going to have that no matter where they are. They could be in 5 feet of water, chest level for me or you, and you're going to have a child that gets exhausted and isn't noticed and drowns because there's not somebody watching them. So the reason why I think it's set at that 8 foot level and where they are is certainly with lifeguards, right? With the appropriate safety measures that we've obviously seen historically as the most effective, is that people want to swim. They want to be out over their head. They want to enjoy the water. That's why they come to the beach and do that. So to try and say, I heard it was last session or the session before, hey, let's bring the buoys in so people are never above chest level water. You know, what you're going to do if you do that, you're going to set people up for going beyond the buoy line because that's just not, you know, that's like saying we're going to go to a roller coaster park, but we're only going to let the roller coasters go 3 miles an hour. There's a natural place, and it's not based on what people like as much as it's based on what our response time is. But people go there to swim and be over their heads and do that, I think. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Kate, you know the buoy placement practice is 8 feet, the depth that they set them?
Yes, the permit that Sean referenced does say 8 feet.
Okay, thank you.
And of course, Tom, there's always a little bit of play in that as far as it's not going to be exact, right? As you can imagine, 8 feet is not an exact science in Lake Michigan when you've got one day flat, calm water and the next day is 6 to 8 foot rollers. So my lifeguards were repositioning buoys more often than not. Anybody who's remembers, you know, the days that we had lifeguards probably remembers lifeguards pulling buoys off the beach and bringing them back out there. Yeah, we just didn't have quite the great securing, whatever you guys do now. They weren't secured as good then, but we were always moving them. If they were in too far or out too far or something, we moved them. And Tom, one other thing I wanted to mention about buoys, since we're talking about it, it came up last meeting, is I think the way it's designated now, at least on our permit, is there is a jet ski lane, and there always was, not always, but there was all the way back since the 90s. We discussed, you know, jet skis started to become really prevalent in the 90s. They were cheaper, everybody could afford them. People wanted to run them right up on the beach, and we had to come up with something, and that's when the jet ski lane was designed. And it's very specific on the permit of that jet ski lane, so folks can ride up that lane and beach their jet skis. That's the case now, from what I understand, at least the permit and what I've seen the city doing. And that was the case all the way back when we had lifeguards.
Jet ski lane is on the south end of the South Beach, and there's another watercraft lane. We call them a watercraft lane because they're supposed to be used by everything, motorized, non-motorized, but
Yeah.
at the north end of the North Beach. So really keeping it separate from the swim areas so that boaters can be in their area and swimmers be in their area.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kate. Cool. So just, oh, go ahead.
Sean, does that, are you, the past practices, have you finished, is that a conclusion, or do you have a little bit more?
So just a very little bit more. I'll try and make it fast, but again, I think this is so important as we talk about lifeguards. That's why I want to cover this. So 'cause a lot of it you guys talked about. So
And then you do that, and then we'll get to the 3 hands that are raised for questions.
okay, awesome. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate the time on this. So I already talked about training, I think, and kind of how that that went. The big thing I want to talk about is emphasize on that is the tribal knowledge, and that's just kind of what drove a lot of what we were able to do and why it was so effective at the time. That is certainly something we're going to have to overcome, starting a program from scratch. But I think we've got better resources than we've ever had before, with guys on the phone like Adam and Faith and the guys that are running programs elsewhere. So that's pretty awesome. Duties. Obviously, I think I just read that you guys spend $27,000 having somebody ride around on a side-by-side replacing or putting flags up. That's a little more, sorry, a little less than half of what we spend on the lifeguard program in total when we had lifeguards. And that wasn't just flag posting, that was basically everything that lifeguards did. So we obviously assessed and changed the flags every day. And when people talk about changing flags, we're not talking about, you know, every 3 hours or when the NOAA website says, or sometimes every hour or even more. We also changed the flags based on conditions for each beach, in that we would red flag part of the beach and we would yellow flag another or green flag another. We could have all 3 flags flying at one beach at one time, depending on what the conditions are, the structural currents, the longshore currents, basically what was happening. Because as you can imagine, people come to the beach, they're pretty PO'd if the whole beach is red flagged and you know, they spent their hard-earned money to come here. We tried very hard to make a portion of the beach green or yellow if it was appropriate. Now, that's not to say we just made it willy-nilly. Certainly our job was to keep folks safe, and we just were constantly assessing that. We're putting folks in the water to see what those currents were like. We're looking at wave action, we're looking at weather, we're looking at wind. There was just a lot of things that we talked about. And then depending on what was going on, we would take folks out of the tower and put them right on the beach, so they're close to the swimmers if it was a yellow flag area, to explain like, hey, it's a fun wavy day, right? Everybody wants to play in the waves, but this is a day that you've got to be extra careful, and we've got extra guards here. The cool part about that is when we red flagged a beach, we could put one person on the red flag beach, and we could take all the other guards and bring them down to the yellow flagged area. And we could basically double up so folks could have fun in the waves and just enjoy themselves and get nuts, but still do it in a safe way, because we had lifeguards there watching them, whistling them in, not babysitting. I've heard that before, like, oh, people think it's a big babysitting program. No, it's basically like having a police officer tell you when you're doing 68 miles an hour that the speed limit is 60. You slow down. That's what we were doing there. So pier safety, we spent a lot of time on, I spent probably hundreds of hours on the pier, walking up and down the pier when it was rough, explaining to people that they couldn't jump off the pier, that they couldn't board a boat from a pier, which we had is more times than you can imagine, people thinking they could pull their boat right up to the pier and jump on. People jumping off the pier on a rough day or a day that not even necessarily that rough, but South Haven gets churned up and the water's not clear. And people that aren't from South Haven have no idea that there's riprap. Those that don't know, you know, the stones, the big stones next to the pier, they have no idea that less than a foot below the surface of where they're getting ready to dive into head first is a stone that's going to break their neck. So on rough days and days that we saw that happening, we'd have somebody walk, we'd just send our walker out on the pier to educate people like, hey, probably not a good idea to dive down there, because yesterday we just finished our spinal training to bring folks with broken necks in from jumping off the pier. Swimming between the piers. You wouldn't imagine the number of people, especially young kids, mid-20s, males, not mentioning any names, that thought it would be cool to swim between the piers just to say they could. You can imagine how dangerous that is when there's boats coming up and down the channel. So a lot of pier safety stuff. You guys talk about putting a rope across and signage and all these things. And I think all those things are great to talk about. However, having a person that is out there that is knowledgeable, it's been their job to learn why it's dangerous, and talking to people and just having a conversation with them. You would not believe how many people are willing to just say, wow, I had no idea of that. And I didn't even see that sign there. And they'll listen to you. And if they don't listen, it was real easy because I carried a police band radio on my hip, and I could have the police officers there that were more than happy to write a ticket if somebody was giving us a hassle. So that was pure safety. Buoy placement, we already talked about. Incursions, huge one. I saw it last summer, actually, boats coming into the swim area to drop folks off. Tom, you talked about the depth of the buoys. Some folks, obviously, they want to drop their family off the beach. They don't really understand the buoy lane where they can bring, I think Kate called it a watercraft lane. They don't understand that they can come in that lane, but they can't come in the other part of the buoyed area. Well, they don't want to drop their wife and kids off in 8 feet of water. So they think, hey, I'm just going to drive right up to the beach. We had tons of folks that thought they could just drive their boat with a propeller, not a jet boat, not a jet ski, right into the swim area and unload their family. Where it really becomes an issue is when it's a rough day and it's not breakers or anything. You know, the lake itself is not too bad, but when you get in close to shore, those wave actions change. And I've actually had a jet boat almost flip over. It actually ejected all the folks there, and their beer cans, by the way, in the swim area. And the boat just kept on through the swim area. And I had 2 lifeguards that basically had to chase the boat down in the swim area and pull the tether cord to get it to stop. So that's an example of buoy placement and incursions and what lifeguards did. Public education. I can't stress this one enough. I mean, everything you guys have talked about from lights, I mean, God bless it, great ideas, you know, lights on buoys and all these things. I can only imagine the costs and having things, you know, whether it be new signage or signage by the beach, or we're going to find people even more money or whatever. Education was, no kidding. Adam, any of the guys on the line will pipe up later with current practices to explain to you that education was probably 98% of what we did, other than keeping our eyes on the water. That was primary. I am not kidding with you when I said our guards were of the mindset that they knew that if there were people in the water, their eyes were on the water. That was it. That was their primary responsibility. But education was a pretty darn close second. And it was everything from drinking on the beach and the laws of the beach, to the danger areas, to longshore currents, structural currents, dangers of swimming out to the boat, flotation devices. Probably one of the biggest hidden dangers. I think Dave has an example of being on his board just a couple years ago, having to chase somebody down that was on a flotation device, and they were headed to Chicago. An offshore wind, it's one of the most dangerous things. And that's basically, from my understanding, Cam, correct me if I'm wrong, what happened to one of our drownings where they just slipped off. And just as a side note, by the way, Jasmine, thank you. Trained lifeguard, right? I haven't been a lifeguard for a lot of years, so I'm a little too fat and out of shape to do that anymore. But it happened with my own son, where he was on a flotation device, and I was a little bit, 10 feet away from him, and just heard, I had my back to him and didn't hear exactly, something sounded different. And I turned around and realized he was no longer on his float. He fell off and he was just over his head. And it was that fast that it happened. So again, that's what lifeguards do as far as just watching that kind of stuff. Public education is the biggest one I can stress. The last couple of things I want to say is about that program and what we did is we had a fantastic relationship with the police. Kate, I'm going to cover this a little bit later if I get the chance, but I'm really surprised that Chief Thompson Natalie didn't have the chance to be here or to weigh in, because she was a police officer, street cop at the time when I was a lifeguard back in the day. and I think she'll tell you what the relationship was. And I'd love to hear what their recommendations are. I don't know if there's like a gag order on him and the fire chief or what, on basically weighing in on what they think about lifeguards specifically, but I have yet to hear them say anything about lifeguards. And that goes as far as the city spending a lot of money to send one of their sergeants to surf guard training out in California, one of the premier training in the world. And we have yet to hear from them. We're here tonight talking about lifeguards, and you guys have somebody on staff that is a trained surf guard, more training than I had as a lifeguard. Obviously a lot less experience because I've got thousands of hours on our beaches doing the job, but I'm amazed that he's not here to talk. So I just wanted to say that our relationship with the police officers, any one of the ones that you talk to, Natalie Thompson, I think Pat Carlotto, Chris Mersman, Antoine Bell, that I was a lifeguard with, will explain to you, again, to use the word force multiplier, how much we were able to basically at a quarter of their wage take the weight off of them for responding to foolishness a lot of times on the beach. And then even more so for the fire department, being able to be their frontline eyes and ears for rescues to be effective and already be there and give them the information they need. Our relationship, not as good with the fire department. Not that it was bad, but I think it was just always a separate organization. Towards the end, it got much better under Randy, Chief Van Wynen, and some of the folks, but there was just a lot of co-training that happened towards the end there that I think it was getting better and better. But I think they'll tell you, if they can show up to the beach in their full gear and not have to get in the water, and they can just take a rescued person from there to the fire truck or to the ambulance and get them, hightail them to the hospital, it's infinitely more effective than them having to strip down and do some kind of rescue with a helmet on. And I know Chief Wise, former Chief Wise, will tell you, because I asked him point blank, I was like, hey, I noticed when you did that rescue, you didn't have your helmet on. He told me in his own words, yeah, I felt like I was going to drown when I was going after that guy. The guy that he was able to rescue and pull to safety, thank God. But he will be the first one to tell you that, wow, that almost didn't go very well. So our relationship with the fire department, I think, was also good and improving, and it could have been, can continue to be much better. And the last thing I'll cover is I just wanted everybody to know the equipment that we had, because I know Randy, Chief Van Wynen, former chief, has some inputs on some of the jet skis and four-wheelers and whatnot. I'm not as big of a fan on that, and I can go into why. I mean, I love the idea, don't get me wrong. You know, it'd be awesome. The more equipment, the better. And he's got fantastic ideas and reasons and even training that he told me about why. However, where we're at now, just to get to where we were 20 years ago, is infinitely better. And what lifeguards can do without any of that equipment. The lifeguards with just a swimsuit and a can were super effective. And that's what they had for equipment. They had towers. They were in elevated lifeguard towers, some of which my father built because we didn't have enough of them. And we decided we need better coverage. So he helped us get to 7 lifeguard towers. We had rescue cans. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's the big red can with the rope on it that Pamela Anderson carries around the beach. She's running down during the montages. We had rescue board. So each beach had a rescue surfboard, basically. And what that was used for is a lot of times if there was somebody we were trying to get that was out of the lifeguard area, out of the swim area, and we needed to try and get them, it's a lot more efficient, faster, and use a lot less energy to try and recover somebody with one of those boards if you're trying to help somebody outside that that guarded area, basically. So that was also a tool that we had. And then I think I mentioned before that we had the radios. We went from having just police band radios where I could call up South Haven Dispatch direct on the radios when I first started in the 80s to only having one of those on each beach, and then having just walkie-talkies for all the towers to talk to each other in the late 90s. And that was obviously because those police band radios were super expensive and they didn't want a lot of chatter on there, and we needed to talk to each other. So they kind of gave us that other option. But that police band radio, once again, allowed us to be a force multiplier. And you would be amazed how professional. You can ask Dawn, the fire chief's wife, current wife now, or the current fire chief's wife, what it was like to have that radio at, I think she was 15 or 16 years old, and be able to talk directly to police dispatch. So we did have radios, and we were able to talk to those guys super quick. And then Yeah, and then of course, first aid kits was the only other thing I wanted to cover. We had a bin at our main lifeguard station that had all of our first aid equipment and basically any stuff that we needed, extra supplies, extra flags, etc. But we tried to keep that first aid equipment just at the main tower, and it was usually something that was the guy who was walking, the lifeguard who was on the roaming patrol was the one who did that. Because again, we didn't want somebody a lifeguard taking their eyes off of the water to try and put a Band-Aid on somebody who got a cut finger or a bee sting. So we would pretty much direct them back to the main tower unless it was obviously an emergency, in which case I had direct line to the fire department. I could call them down there to take care of anything we needed. So that's big picture on a lot of what I think you guys covered. I'd love to go into more detail as far as alcohol and dogs and all the things you guys talked about as far as enforcement, and even, there was the question of how do you make people get out of the water. I've seen the comments on the Life page and on Facebook that lifeguards have no authority and they couldn't get people out of water. I'm not going to tell you what we used to do. If you want to know one-on-one, I'm glad to bend your ear. I appreciate your time, but I got to tell you, all you have to do is talk to one of these guys that'll talk next about current practices, and they'll tell you there is not an issue. Nobody's telling lifeguards that they're not going to get out of the water. And if they do, they have tools to handle that. This is not rocket science. We're not reinventing the wheel. It's something that's already been done. So that's the big stuff I have, Tim, barring any questions.
Okay, thanks, Sean. So we had 3 hands up. Now it looks like there's 2. So we've got Greg Field and Dave Benjamin. So just a reminder, it's 7:15. You've got 3 minutes, and your question or comment should be related to lifeguards' past practices. So Kate, if you'll do Greg first and then Dave.
All right, I'll keep my comments brief here. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. First of all, thank you. I really appreciate you letting me speak here, and I really applaud your efforts in keeping your community and visitors safe in South Haven through these conversations. So thanks for letting me speak, and thanks for everything that you all are doing. My name is Greg Field. I'm with Michigan State University. My research area is water safety and drowning prevention. So I do know quite a bit about, I don't know everything, but I know a lot about lifeguard effectiveness. I'm also the director of the ARC project. We do surf and water safety camps for at-risk inner city youth in a couple of different cities, including here on the Great Lakes shoreline. And I am a former certified surf rescue guard. I did the training initially with Adam, your sergeant in town, and he's a great guy, and he'd be an amazing guard. It wouldn't take long for him to work the kinks out. He's very talented. In regards to your questions about before and after lifeguards in South Haven and what the data might say, if we look at trends across the nation and around the world, and you can reference the CDC report on lifeguard effectiveness, the Australian Water Safety Council report, USLA, ISLF, and many more, the vast majority of drownings do occur away from lifeguards or emergency response, period. And drowning risks reduce significantly, like big time, in the presence of lifeguards. There's no question, the data is clear. And you can go to states that have guards on their coastline. You go across the nation, across the world. If there are sound lifeguard programs, lives are saved, period. We don't have to look at data before and after in South Haven. If it's done well, lives are saved. And that's the key, is it needs to be done well. Therefore, a true commitment to safety at your beaches, so protecting your local families and visitors, means lifeguards, and that's without a doubt. So that's kind of what the data says. If you want to look at more, I'm happy to send you reports, but the data is very clear. If we want to look at data here, Dave Benjamin has basically access to the last 12 years and how many incidents have happened on the lake. There was reference to this past year being kind of an outlier. It is not. There have been plenty of years with 100+ drownings in the last 12 years, or pushing 100 drownings on the Great Lakes. So it's not like this past year was something crazy. There's been many more years like that, unfortunately. I do have a few questions for Sean. So Sean, I'm going to get you back in the limelight here. What sort of like training did you adhere to? Was it USLA? And then did you have Lake Michigan specific procedures and protocols, or did you kind of like pass knowledge down through the ranks as far as like upwelling and structural currents and things like that that are very specific to Lake Michigan beaches? like, did you guys just kind of pass that information down, or was it part of your training program? Was it written in somehow? If you have that, I would love to see it, because we're pushing the state to get guards through our work at Michigan State. And I'd love to see some of that information. And then looking back, Sean, what equipment would be on your wish list if you had guards tomorrow? Like, what things did you wish you had? Do you wish you had a fleet of wetsuits for cold water? Just kind of talk through, I guess, who was the corps that you trained through, or were you kind of self-certified through the city? And then also, like, what would you want if you were able to have guards as of tomorrow?
Okay, hang on before you answer that, Sean. What I'd rather you do is answer the questions that have to do with past practices, not such things as what would be your wish list, because that's not the topic we're on right now.
You bet. No, thanks, Tim. I appreciate you keeping us on topic for this, and I'm sure we'll get a chance for current practices to talk about that. But yeah, so great question. I appreciate it, Greg. So I'm a little embarrassed to say that, a lot of it was corporate knowledge. But so to start with the basics, like I said earlier, we were certified via the Red Cross, basic lifeguard certification. And then we were basically mentored for a while before we were even allowed to be looked at for a beach lifeguard. As a rule, this was most of the folks that came from South Haven. Not everybody did we have this kind of viz on at that point. But we were mentored, and basically we took some time to be a pool guard and maturing and figuring out if you could talk to the public, how you're going to handle problems. And then we were brought up to the level of basically being able to apply and test for a beach guard position. And at that point, it was an application. It was a physical fitness test in the water, and then obviously beach training from there. Everything beyond Red Cross lifeguard training back then, as I remember, we just didn't really have the resources we have now. And I mean, keep in mind, this was when I was first a lifeguard. We're talking about over 30 years ago. Kind of embarrassing to say, but a lot of years ago, that we didn't have the internet. We didn't have those kind of resources. So it was very much tribal knowledge. But that, I don't mean to say that and diminish the value of it at all, because you can have somebody that can read the book about longshore currents and structural currents, and we didn't even use those terms at the time. At the time, undertow was the common word, right? That's what everybody talked about. And they talked about the pier being hollow underneath, which was not the case when I was a lifeguard there. But people still had that knowledge because at one time it was a wooden structure, et cetera, et cetera. But we basically learned from those senior guards as a junior guard, as a rookie, basically, of how to handle the beach. And I don't just mean the water. I mean handling drunk folks on the beach, handling situations that came up on the beach, when to call and how soon to call the fire department, when to call the police department and how soon. That was all basically tribal knowledge. Some of it written. Again, unfortunately, I don't have a ton. But I did spend that last year trying to capture a lot of that before I went off to training myself, because even at a very elementary level, I realized that was going to be valuable. I had no idea how valuable, and that we'd be here today. So I hope that answers your question. A lot of it was fairly informal or not federally or written down and run by an organization that was much bigger than ourselves, but it was very professional. And it was by no means, I've heard the comments on Facebook and whatnot about these young kids and it being a very Barney Fife kind of operation. And I can tell you from being one of those guys that went through that training, and I think Dawn Hins will tell you that right now, that that was in fact not the case. We took that job quite seriously. Could it have been better? Absolutely. That's why I'm so excited with the information that you and some of the others provide out there today. So hope that answers your question.
Okay, thanks. Next up, we've got Dave Benjamin, and then after that, we have Carissa Bora, I think is how the name's pronounced. And just a reminder, to state your name and the fact that you have 3 minutes, but please try to keep it to a comment or question on past practices. Okay. So Dave and then Carissa.
All right. I'll just go ahead and ask Dave Benjamin to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Sean, how you doing? So I just wanted to clarify on what equipment you guys used in the past. I was kind of keeping a list as you were talking. When you say a tower, do you mean like a lifeguard chair, or is it like a large, extra large tower? I think
You're on
Sean's
mute,
on.
Sean.
Got to unmute myself. Trying to be courteous there. Yeah, no, they were towers. So the first towers that we had that were one on each beach were metal pipe towers. Basically, they were elevated about 8 to 10 feet in the air. We obtained other towers. Kate might have some of this info, or some of the folks that were around a little bit longer than me or at different times, but we obtained towers from other cities in the early 90s some were wooden, that we had a couple that were wooden. And then the ones that we were short, when we decided to go to 7 towers, like I mentioned earlier, they were actually built by my father, and they were steel towers. We specifically built those and made those to be the main tower, because we made those, I want to say it was between 10 and 12 feet tall. And we made them very specifically to be out of very thin gauge, or not thin gauge metal, but thin metal. So they didn't obstruct the view for folks that were sitting behind the tower, but we made them very tall, so we could have like one main tower that could really kind of oversee the whole beach. So yes, all the towers were elevated, I would say at a minimum of 8 feet above, and they all had seats. They all had places to place an umbrella. They all had a spot for a flag. That's where our flags were posted, was on the tower. So that particular section of the beach was flagged according to conditions off of the tower. And sometimes the tower would have 2 flags. It would have red on one side and yellow on the other, meaning, hey, you could, this side of the tower is yellow flag area where you could swim, but swim with caution. The other side was red. That was really useful for keeping folks away from the pier when there was those structural currents or bad waves. You guys have probably seen it a ton on North Beach. I always call it the washing machine. And actually, we had a couple saves about 10 years or so ago off of the North Beach because of that. I wasn't even a guard. I was just visiting at the time. But it's that crazy washing machine effect when we have a northwest wind and it hits the North Pier, and it just creates some unbelievably rough water there. So we would red flag that area. That's how we did that with the towers. The equipment, so we had the rescue boards, 1 per beach. It was about a 8 to 10 foot lifeguard particular or life surf rescue board with handles mounted on the side, for basically, think of a surfboard, but a long surfboard with rescue handles. So that's what that was. We had 1 for each beach, and then we had rescue cans, 1 for each tower. And then we had extras where the walker would always carry a can as well, or the person walking the pier would always have their rescue can. The rescue can, other than a swimsuit, as you can imagine, is probably the lifeguard's best tool. Maybe a pair of sunglasses, but we felt naked if we didn't have that with us. Because that's the first thing when you're making a rescue. You don't, like most people probably think that we go out there and try and grab the person and swim them in. That's not, in fact, what a lifeguard will do. In those conditions, because it's pretty treacherous and pretty tough, the first thing we'll do to an active drowning victim is take that can and we'll reach that can to the person who's an active drowning victim. And we're hoping that they grab onto that can. And chances are that's exactly what they're going to do, because all they're thinking about is getting their next breath. So they'll try and climb up that can. And while they do that, you can be swimming them in, dragging them with that can without even touching their body. And if they try to climb up the rope because they want to get to you, all you have to do is release, and they've still got the can. They can float. They're good for now, but now you've got them and you can bring them in. Because I can tell you as a lifeguard, there's nothing so unsettling, and I've had this happen, and I've done it to other lifeguards to make sure they can get out of it. There's nothing as unsettling as having an active drowning victim wrap their arms around your neck, and you want to talk about a tight squeeze. All they're thinking about is getting their next breath. They'll choke you to death, not even realizing that you're there to save them. So lifeguard cans were the next tool. And then, of course, we had all the miscellaneous stuff with, our outfit was typically guard shorts or guard swimsuits for the girls, T-shirts, typically long sleeve T-shirts to keep the sun off your body, jackets for the cold days, also long sleeves, first aid kits. So the standard first aid kit that any, first responder at that level would have. We'd have the mouth-to-mouth breathing guards, a lot of the first aid Band-Aids and ointments and that kind of thing, bee stings. We started carrying the anaphylactic, I forget, Randy could probably tell you.
EpiPen.
Yeah, EpiPen, thank you. those things. We never actually had, and I thought this was great that Randy had that in there, but it'd be something to talk further about. We just didn't at the time, but the defib, we didn't have that. And we never had an option to really use that, but not to say it's not a great tool, of course. That is the gist of really what we had. I mean, we had the miscellaneous stuff that you would have for cleaning the beach between, you know, shovels and nets to get fish out of the water and just the miscellaneous stuff. But we did not have jet skis. We did not have four-wheelers. We always thought jet skis would be fantastic. We actually approached and talked to Mr. Vanderzee from Vanderzee's at one point, and he had made an offer of some sort. I don't remember the specifics, that either Kawasaki or Yamaha could somehow provide something at low to zero cost to the city, but we always struggled with that. I personally struggled with it because, again, our folks were pretty young, and I didn't want there to even be a perception, even during training. I mean, Randy can pipe in. He'll tell you what some of the training on jet skis is like. It looks like you're fooling around on these things, but it's amazing what guys can do when they're trained. But we didn't even want to broach that subject because we were pretty effective at what we did. Our swim area isn't super, super big. You know, we were able to pretty effectively do what we needed to do with just bodies, manpower. Would it have been awesome? Yes. Four-wheelers, we never had them and never really saw a need. And even to this day, I will say at this point, until convinced otherwise, I am not convinced we need them for our size of the beaches, for what we do, because I just think there's such a value in walking the beach and interacting with the folks one-on-one. The teaching that goes on and the receptivity when you're not on a vehicle and having that barrier, I just think was very valuable. But again, I stand to be corrected. I'm not saying that I'm totally against it. That's just how I feel right now. Oh, and if I didn't mention it, Dave, probably, again, I skipped over this. The most important tool that a lifeguard has is a very loud whistle, preferably a Thunder, an Acme Thunder, because you can hear it about a mile away. And you would be amazed. I've heard everybody talk about how people don't listen to lifeguards, or in today's society, they wouldn't listen to lifeguards. They'll cover that in current practices. But I can tell you then, absolutely, if you blow the whistle, people are listening. And it's amazing what a little bit of shame will do to get people in line. When they see that the whistle is being blown at you because you're out past the buoys, it's pretty amazing how quickly people come back in from the buoys or do whatever you need them to do. So that's the equipment we had 20 years ago.
Okay, so 7 towers, bathing suit, t-shirts, sunglasses, rescue can, rescue board, a whistle, radio, pocket mask for rescue breaths, beach flags, first aid kit. It's pretty simple, the equipment that it takes to employ a lifeguard.
Yes, sir.
Did you also have other responses on the beach that were not water related, such as heart attacks, bee stings, heat stroke, broken limbs, cuts, abrasions that you would treat beach patrons for?
Yes, sir. All the time. To include things that you wouldn't even associate with a lifeguard, and that is a vessel in distress off the beach that we could see with our binoculars. And we would call a South Haven dispatch, and they would dispatch either fire department or Coast Guard for vessel in distress, because it was a day that nobody else was out there. They didn't have a radio, and they're basically in a situation completely outside of our swim area, but that we just happened to notice. Also, missing children. I would probably say I've done 50 missing children, most of which were never even near the beach. They wandered up to Kids Corner. If you can imagine, it was new. It was only about 4 years old when I was first a lifeguard. So they had children that would just wander up to Kids Corner or wander downtown, go get an ice cream, go to the ice cream shop when we had one there. So missing children was another big one. Yes, in answer to your question, many, many, many events that were not lifeguard specific related. But I say that with a little bit of caution that, you know, our lifeguards always, their primary duty was to keep their eyes on the water. So, yes.
Okay, thank you.
ESPN.
Hey, Carissa.
It looks like Carissa doesn't have her hand up anymore. I know Chief Thompson's here. I know she got here a little late because she had other things going on. So I'll ask.
Carissa put her hand up again.
There we go. We'll go with Carissa Faro. I'm not sure if I'm saying the last name right.
Yeah, hi, sorry, it wasn't letting me unmute myself for some reason. I'm with WZZM. We are doing a story on the upcoming vote here. And I know you didn't really want to talk about the present, but I was wondering if you could maybe talk about the past on how you wanted to, on how they would pay for lifeguard services and equipment and anything that was needed. Or if you could even talk about how it would be paid for today.
Is that kind of for me, Kate, as far as, I know the pay thing really isn't in my lane, other than I probably know more than most based on what you've presented and talked about. I know what we paid and I know how much the program costs. I know the equipment costs. So I can talk to that if that's appropriate. How it was paid, I can talk a little bit too, just because again, I have the corporate knowledge of the beach parking and how that, originally was not how lifeguards were paid. And I don't know where the budget came from to pay for lifeguards before beach parking. But I can very definitively tell you that beach parking was passed specifically to pay for lifeguards and beach improvements. I mean, without a doubt, but it is in black and white that beach parking was passed by city council under the guise of funding the lifeguard program. So that's how it was funded. There was shortfalls. I think we pointed that out in the packet if you haven't seen it. But interestingly enough, out of the 179,000 or whatever it was, I'd just like to point out that the lifeguard program was only about 80,000 of that. So less than half of the beach parking. Yeah, for lack of a better way at the time, I mean, I was immature, but I called it a self-licking ice cream cone. But basically, the lifeguards was a very small portion of what that cost. And I know that there's a cost involved with collecting it, and that's just, it is what it is. It costs money to do that. But the lifeguard portion was not a majority of what it cost to, or what we collected from that program. $80,000 was roughly what I can tell you that it costs. And that was payroll and the limited amount of equipment that we needed to do, because it was typically just new lifeguard suits and jackets. Occasionally we used to keep and collect all the jackets, so we reuse those. All the cans we reused. I don't remember ever buying a new can, because obviously we kept those and we tried to keep them in real good condition. Same thing with the surfboards. The rescue board that I used in 1989 as a lifeguard was the same rescue board I used in 2009, or correction, 1999, 89 to 99. It was the same boards that we used. Lifeguard towers, a lot of them were donated from other cities. And my father built a couple, and he built them at cost. So that was just kind of a fairly nominal cost. Yeah. So equipment wise, that's what we had and what it costs. The radios were provided. The police band radios were provided by the police department. I don't know what the cost is there, but I know they weren't new radios. We probably got their old ones, but they worked fine. And then at some point we did invest in walkie-talkie radios, so all the lifeguard towers could talk to each other. I don't have a cost on those. I'm guessing probably less than $50 per radio.
What I can speak to is that there's significant costs that go into maintaining the beach. And I know that quite a bit of the current beach fund goes into the daily cleanings that are undertaken there. Plus a lot of the servicing of the restrooms there. I mean, the restrooms get quite a bit of good use there. And in fact, I'm glad you brought up what the past was. I know that we pay for the beach flag monitoring out of that, all the DPW's time out there clearing sand, cleaning the beaches, installing the ADA accessible mats and maintenance of those items, reinstalling the buoys. And I also know that there's a portion that's socked away for other capital improvement projects. So we rebuilt the South Beach drive there and had that extra loop put in. And then I know that we did recently the North Beach. Those are not small projects. They went up into, I think, the $500,000 range. That takes some time to build up those fund balances. And of course, we do try to maximize and leverage our local dollars with grant awards. But you still do have to build up a local match, and many times it's 50%. So you have to come up with those funds, and the beach funds are used to, one, maintain the beaches now, two, deal with the pay for the beach flag and the beach the rescue throw rings, and then of course build a fund balance for improvements that are always needed. I know that we do now have a South Beach concept plan to expand the bathrooms down there, because really there is quite a few people using the restrooms, and that's always needed. So those are things that would be projected to be using the beach funds for. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, but in light of, if I can respond, just because again, we're on past practices for lifeguard specific. Although those are all great things and they're fantastic improvements and whatnot. Once again, we can't discount the fact that beach parking was specifically passed to fund the lifeguard program in addition to beach improvements. And not one of the things that you mentioned, as much as I love all those things and I think they're fantastic, not one of those items saves a life on the beach. And I think any of the 4 families that just lost somebody on the beach would be the first to tell you that if we had to have people picking up a little trash on the beach or have the lifeguards do that, or come up with some other alternative ways to have some things done, they would have liked to have had a lifeguard on the beach that time that they lost their loved ones. So.
Okay, Sean, don't forget the beach cleaning. That started to be a huge cost because the city was subcontracting it. So
I was also there when I was the one that went out and actually looked at beach cleaning machines and submitted some of the original beach cleaning machines, the Charrington and some of the other ones that we looked at back in the day to actually.
Right. That's what Gold Coast used. So
Yep.
that was a subcontractor. But okay, anyway, we got to keep going because we're at 7:40 and we have 2 more hands. We have Natalie and Adam. So let's start with Natalie and then we'll move on to Adam. And I think those are the last 2 with hands raised for past practices.
Hello, everybody. I will, but I just wanted to get on the Zoom in at about, so I just wanted to clarify that the city management team invited me to this meeting. They actively are wanting to listen to input or provide it if necessary. So I was helping road patrol. Actually, Sergeant Adam DeBoer, who I've heard referenced a little bit tonight, is phenomenal. He's one of 2 officers I've got working tonight. So we had pretty significant criminal case, which I helped on. So I apologize. But I just wanted to clarify that the management team, City Manager Kate Hosier, has invited me and wanted me to stay in tune to what's going on. So I just wanted to acknowledge everybody, but I do think this is an important issue, and just wanted to get on the record that I am here. And just one small, and I know we're limited on time, but Mr. Russell was talking about just, back in the day and costs of things. So those portable radios back in the early 90s, $50, $100. I can tell you for the police budget, I just had to order 3 of those new portables. Those are running about $6,000 a piece. So just to fast forward on the cost of some of the equipment, basically those aren't fixable anymore. So when we get these portable radios from Motorola and they go bad, you got to buy a new one. So just wanted to throw that in there quick, but I did want to acknowledge that I'm been invited to these meetings and I do think it's an important issue. And I just wanted to make aware that I'm in attendance, and I think it's an important thing for everyone to talk about and make a good decision on. So
Okay.
that's all I have. I won't talk much longer.
Hey, Tim, can I make a quick comment on that? Because I want to clarify what I was talking about with the radios. Yeah, Chief, I know you're way experienced on that with the radios. That wasn't what I was referring to for $50. It was the lifeguard stand to lifeguard stand radios. I'm not sure if you even knew kind of what we had that way. They were the cheapy, well, I say cheapy, still $50 or so a piece. They were the ones that we used to talk to each other, the little two-way radios. I'm not referring to, and nor do I have any info on how much they cost even then for the one radio that we had per beach that we communicated directly to your dispatch. That wasn't the one I was referring to, and I have no doubt that they were a very expensive radio because we were told in no uncertain terms to take care of those radios. The ones I was referring to of $50 were the ones that we talked to each other, and they were basically like a Walmart walkie-talkie type radio. But since we've got you here and we are talking about past practices, I'd love you to weigh in on what your feeling is of what the lifeguards did at the time, how effective it was, and what your position is as far as it being a force multiplier back in the day, whether you agree with that or what your thought was, because I know we worked together quite a bit back then.
Right. So, yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to date myself, but I was a seasonal in 1992. And at that time, the city, the police department had seasonal officers. So there were 8 extra police officers in the summer, which was a big help, because fast forward now, for many reasons, just don't have the interest. We don't have seasonals. So I can just say that from what I remember from then, any extra eyes on the beach were very helpful. And I'm not going to get into the effectiveness of, who can get someone out of the water or not, but I just from, my memory of lifeguards back in the 90s, extra eyes on the beach for whatever reason, whether it's someone in distress in the water, like you hit on, alcohol, any issues that we have on the beach, life safety being the most important, but all the other things that go along with it. In a nutshell, it was just a great extra set of eyes besides life saving for people in distress in the water. I know that it did help the police department with all the other things that happen at, all of our beaches, because we do have 7 public beaches. So that's probably, my input. And again, I would support anything that, the residents, the city council, taxpayers, however it ends up, the police department would definitely support any, efforts that are made on that. But I can just tell you, the more eyes that we have on the beach for any kind of issue, from the police department standpoint, is great, because if I could assign an officer at the beach, every day through the summer, that would be beneficial. But unfortunately, like tonight, we've got 2 officers on and we've got a lot of things going on. It's just not really feasible. So I guess my input for that would be any extra eyes on the beach, whether it be, lifeguards or, interns or, even citizens. This summer, we had a few that were calling about dangerous situations. I would just have to support, any extra set of eyes to help Shays, the police department, be aware of any issues going on is a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that response, Chief. I know, again, you guys do a lot of good work, and I don't know if you remember, but the rescue that we had together on North Beach about 10 years ago, well, 2012, there's actually video of it on YouTube if you ever want to take a look at it. It was the one that you came up shortly after we pulled a couple of those guys off of North Beach during that washing machine. But and when we get to future practices, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I know the mayor asked you and the chief of fire department specifically to weigh in on what you thought was the best way forward. I'd love to hear at that point what your idea is of the best potential solution, whether it's lifeguards or if you have another idea. I'd love to hear what you think is the best way forward, specifically to you and to your police force staff, and why you think that's the best way forward. Because I think the public needs to hear from you specifically and in no uncertain terms as to what you think is the best solution and why. In particular, I'd love to know about the lifeguard option, if you think that's the best, and if not, why. So thank you.
Okay, Adam.
All right. Are they
Yeah.
asking me?
Hi, I'm Adam Abajan again. I'm from City of Evanston. I've been running lifeguards there for 26 years. So I started, or 25 years. I started in 1996. So we kind of overlap, Sean. And what's interesting about that is when you look at the equipment, the practices that you laid out, they're not that different than what we do now. And that's what I wanted to kind of key on here. We still have, we have a rescue board at every of all of our towers. We have a backboard there. We still have a tube there. We use a softer tube nowadays, but we have cans for different scenarios. Nothing you said, just to point it out, because, this is the same equipment, nothing you said is that abnormal. Same with the training that Greg was saying. The difference now is, I do a lot more training online, with videos, not online. But with videos, we have more examples, we have more resources, we have more data, we have more, information, and we have to teach different because people learn different, but it still comes down to exactly what you said: training them, getting them in the water, going through the skill sets. You know, maybe we're a little, you know, more protective of our staff than I what even myself was in 1996. There's a little more concern of that. But it's everything you've laid out, just to say it out loud, is exactly what we do now with a minor alteration. That is it. It is nothing. This is, I mean, as an outsider, and I admit to this community, I'm obviously an outsider in the world of you know, Michigan per se, but I'm not an outsider in the world of water safety, and we still share this big body of water in between. And this is a no-brainer thing to me. It's a weird thing to be discussing, that whether or not there are lifeguards or not, because I grew up in Chicago, we had lifeguards. I guarded in Chicago, we had lifeguards. The lifeguards did a great job in Chicago, taught us what we did. We saved lives. I see them save lives. This summer, unfortunately, due to COVID, they shut their lakefront down and didn't have lifeguards. And that's when their drowning spiked. I don't think their drowning spiked due to COVID. I think their drowning spiked due to not having lifeguards. It's so you're on everything that you've laid out isn't, you know, just for the community as a whole. This isn't what used to happen. This is what's happening everywhere else, that other communities have at their beck and call for their safety and of their family, their loved ones, the people they care about, the people that come to their communities as on a regular basis. So you are not, nothing that you've said is not applicable now, just so it's, you know, official. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see. We've got 7:51, and usually we go for 2 hours. What's the intent tonight with this committee?
Is it possible, Tim, to just wrap up past practices and then start the next conversation at the next meeting on current standards?
Well, that's what I'm asking you guys, what you want to do.
Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I know everybody. I'll weigh in. I know everybody's tired and it's a lot. I know I covered a lot. It was my intent to cover a lot because I think, you know, this is just probably the biggest portion, quite honestly, for you guys to hear all this. And please reach out to me, you know, because I have a lot more. But this clearly, with very little argument, is probably the solution that is best tested and most historically positive. So please reach out to me. But I agree with that thought. Let's go with current practices on the next one. However, Tim, I just want to make a very clear point, just so we're all on the same page, that again, when we do this and we have another meeting a month from now, that there is a cost to that, because I want to be very clear that, you know, we're on the track right now that even if we all decided miraculously that lifeguards is a fantastic idea, that it's not going to happen for this summer without basically immediate action. And I get that. I know how city politics works to an extent, not as good as you, Tim or Kate, but I just want to be very clear that what we are doing by basically extending this out, and I owe this to the community that's listening right now, and to the Sioux Chambers of the world that are listening, that when we do this and we extend this out, we're not talking about seatbelts on golf carts here. We're not talking about stickers on golf carts or whatever. What we're talking about is potentially more lives that are not going to have the chance that we can give them with lifeguards this summer. So I want to be very clear about that this is a process that needs to happen quickly if we intend on trying to get something going by this summer.
Well, I think you also have to look at, we're an ad hoc committee, and city council said, hey, we want to look at this. I think they were pretty clear in, we're creating an ad hoc committee to explore it rather than implement. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's the impression I had. And I know they just went through their priority setting session, and I don't think they budgeted anything for any kind of increased beach safety. Now, if they did, and we need to move faster, then they need to say that, right? Otherwise, I think we just kind of keep going at this pace and finish it when we can finish it.
Hey,
Tim,
Tim,
is it possible to get that insight from the city? I'm sorry, Randy.
no, if we're gonna put it off to the next meeting for current standards, it'd be really nice. I hope that Craig Field is back in. Because I think he could really help us on, what the national standards are now.
Yeah, Randy, not only that, you're spot on with Greg. And also I keep referring to Adam Abajan. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Adam. But just so you know, Randy and the rest of the staff that are working on this, we've got several current beachfront supervisors and or lifeguard supervisors from all the way over to Chicago area that are on the line right now that have current training manuals, hiring information, et cetera, et cetera. Adam has actually, I just talked to him the other day. He's actually written some nationally renowned material that I think he's willing to share. And I think would be fantastic, Randy, for you to take a look at, especially with your background. I think you'd really appreciate some of what's been done in the last 20 years.
Well, one of the things that just popped in my mind, while you were all talking, even with my ocean now, the towers we had wouldn't make it. They'd be an absolute no-no because you get under the industrial standard. And I just wonder how they do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
So great question.
Who is it that intends to speak at on the agenda item of current standards? What was the intent there? Who has the outline?
I have the outline, and I think we were looking at, I know that we have the NMRMA manual that we were given, so we have that in the packet for tonight.
Did we have a specific special guest this evening that was to speak to current standards?
Yes, we were having our MMRMA person come, but I don't see him on the list here, at least if I don't recognize the name necessarily. So we'll make sure that is in place for our next meeting.
What does that acronym stand for, Kate? I don't think everybody's familiar.
Sure, it's our insurance carrier, Michigan Municipal Risk Management Authority.
Okay, so for current standards, that's awesome that we have an insurance person that writes insurance here to talk the next time. But I would suggest, and I'm glad to take the lead on this, I will organize a group of current folks that are running current programs, what their standards are, how they bump up against national standards, to have them present exactly what's happening both nationally as well as programs on our Great Lakes and current hiring practices, training, et cetera, so you can see exactly what other folks are doing on our communal Great Lake and how it's effective. So I'd be glad to do that.
See, that's kind of, as we get into this current standard, the fire service went through the same thing back in the late 80s and 90s. And that's why I'm kind of interested in that. And it's good, but it also, we lost a lot of people that could have came in, but with the training requirements and that now, it's pretty tough for them.
And what I'm trying to gauge is, for current standards, a synopsis, are we looking at a half-hour presentation, an hour?
I think honestly, Tim, we have as much to unpack with current standards as we did with past practices.
Yes, I agree, Tim. I think we could spend a lot of time on that because that's where your costs are going to be.
Yeah, that's a great point.
That's going to be the defining thing if the city can do it or not, I think.
And keep in mind, you've got, obviously all of us are volunteers for this, right? Nobody's getting paid. It's out of the the thought of doing the best
Right.
thing for our city and our community. But you've also got folks that are absolutely not tied to our community here tonight. For instance, I keep referring to Adam Abijan as someone who is willing to be here all night tonight for the last 2 hours. And I'm guessing he'll be more than happy to come next time to offer a lot of in-depth knowledge as to what's currently happening. And he has zero vested interest in South Haven. He might not have known where South Haven is on the map prior to a couple nights ago, although I'm guessing by reading some of the articles that he told me he read, he was aware. But you've got a fantastic resource base right now that I think would really be unfortunate if we didn't take advantage of them.
Okay, and then part B there, regulations and enforcement. We had 4 items: existing ordinance, enforcement, emergency service, and communications and public outreach. Is that another meeting, or is that 2 meetings too?
Tim, did we not? We covered public outreach in one of the other meetings, didn't we, when Pam came and spoke? Is
I
that a
think so.
box we've checked or no?
No. Not completely.
Okay.
Okay.
But the reason I'm asking this, I'm trying to get an idea of how many more meetings we're gonna have to have so we can
Right.
schedule those dates.
Yeah.
I think
Myself, Tim, I think that we're gonna breeze through that. I think, looking at it myself,
Okay,
because we only have the one ordinance.
right?
Yeah, and I
And
think between Chief Thompson and Chief Hens,
yeah,
they clearly can weigh in, and that might be a perfect time for them to weigh in as to specifically what their opinion is. Their unvarnished, the public is asking them their opinion. So that might be a perfect section on the next, not the next one, but the next meeting for them to weigh in exactly what they think is best about the best way to go forward. Let's hear the unvarnished opinion.
So
You
you're-
know,
you're thinking 2 more meetings then, right?
It was 2 or 3.
I would say 3. One, the next meeting being current standards. We could easily spend 2 hours going through and understanding all of the current standards and best practices in place now. The third to cover those other, or the second one to cover those other items that you mentioned, Tim, that are on the agenda. And the third, I think, is when we come together and start talking about a potential proposal or recommendations.
I agree. As much as I hate to see 3 more meetings, I agree. I think that's the least amount that's going to be fair to what we have to cover.
So we would be looking at March 25th, April 22nd, and May 20th, I do believe.
Can we revisit the idea of increasing the frequency of the meetings again? Or is that not an option still?
Well, it's up to the committee.
I'd be for it right off the bat. I mean, the one kickback I got when I suggested that last time is not here tonight. So, I mean, if we could have done this 2 weeks ago, if I would have known, that individual couldn't have made it, because I'm sure he has a busy schedule. I would love to have these every 2 weeks to speed this up and let's get something going. Clearly, you guys know I'm thinking what my position is. This is no kidding. Again, it's not golf carts we're talking about. This is something very much more important than that.
I would like to recommend that at least for the current standards meeting, we see if people are available to have that next meeting 2 to 3 weeks at the most from now.
I'd support that.
Randy,
Well,
what do you
what date-
think? 3 weeks or 2 weeks? or
What date are you looking at?
I can make
The
anything work.
dates I
Tim.
threw out, March 25th, April 22nd, May 20th were the 4 Thursdays.
I can meet whenever, so that's not fair for me.
I'm pretty much the same, so it's not fair for me either. Well, I defer to the folks that have restrictions.
Same here.
And I have none. I would ask for March 11th if we could.
That would work for me.
I'm not available.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, that's tough for me too.
What about the 18th?
I've got another meeting scheduled that night as well.
I'm not available March 18th.
Yeah, it's like last time when we were talking with Chris too. It's just I'm I'm on other boards.
Yeah, I get it. Is there a way to do a different day, or are we kind of set on the Thursdays?
Well, for me, that's the one that worked out, you know, along with a lot of the rest of you. It was just a open one. Most of the other things are first 3 weeks, fourth weeks seem to be always the ones that are the most open.
Sure.
Tim and Kate, could we do this, since the four of us, Sean, Randy, Tom, and I are pretty open-ish? Could we ask you guys to look at calendars and come back to us with a proposed next date?
I think the March 25th is going to be the best date for us.
That's 4 weeks. Sorry, I don't have a calendar up.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Tim,
Yeah.
well, what I can see here is that they want to kind of hurry up and have a meeting in, like in a couple weeks. But I don't see where this is going to help anything, because the city council has not approved or set aside any money for this program. So I can't see it happening before next year if it's going to happen. So I don't see any reason to, at this time, to hurry up and have a meeting in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Plus, you know, we've been talking about a lot more than lifeguards of things that could happen and probably could happen this summer. You know, the sign, you know, things like this, the improvement in the signage, buoys, you know, just a whole variety of things. So if the reality is that it's not, a lifeguard program can't be budgeted for this year, in my mind, it doesn't preclude other things that could happen this year. So that maybe we are making recommendations in phases to the city council and city management to consider.
And that's probably a very good point. The next meeting, we have had, what is this, our third meeting now? We have had some things that have come to the top that we could start the next meeting with to make a small recommendation to city council ahead of the time, and then move into the current standards and continue on with this agenda.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
An example of that, Tim?
What's that?
Yeah.
You have an example of that, like what you're thinking, those things that came to the top?
I think there was some talk about the roping off the pier and some additional signage in a couple spots. And
A
other than that, I'd have to look.
broadened education program.
Right, those are
Yeah,
things that came to mind for me.
and some things that are relatively low cost, so I think they're less likely to be rejected.
Hard to implement. Yeah, I love that. Anything that gets us closer, I think is fantastic, as long as we don't delay too long. Because Tom, I think you have a great point about that. I just don't want to see it as, you know, something we kick the can. Again, I've been involved since '96, and I've seen the can get kicked. And I know that's none of your intentions. I'm assuming all good intentions across the board. I just don't want to see the can get kicked, because we all, let's just break it down to brass tacks. Every one of us has to look someone like Sue Chambers in the eyes to say why we didn't do everything we could try to make this place better. So I'm down with anything you guys are suggesting, Tim. I think it's great. Education, let's go with it. Let's get some things moving first and then press on.
Tim,
Yes.
the other thing that has come up, and you know, that will need to be spoken about, is the winter activities on the beach.
Oh,
The
boy.
people climbing out there on the unstable ice and everything. And since this is a beach committee, I guess we're gonna need to speak about that.
Right.
Could
Yep.
we add that to the agenda or sneak that in with something that's already on the agenda? Because I completely agree with Mr. Segman that is something that's well within our purview.
I think when we talk about current standards, we can review, and I think Sean spoke to this earlier this evening, was the beginning and ending of the time of the lifeguard as on a seasonal basis. So, you know, I think places like California pretty much go 365, right?
Mhm.
Where we are more weather dependent for the swimming on the beach part, but is there a 365 need for somebody to be down there in the inclement weather when people are climbing icebergs?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that falls perfectly in that section, as well as probably the police and the fire department section, because they're the ones down there now during the winter time to weigh in on what they think is the best way forward, or what they need, what we can recommend to city council that they may need to be more effective for that off-season time. That's awesome.
Hey, guys, if I can just interject real quick too. I think it's really important that in our next meeting, if we are talking about the current practices, I know you guys say we can take 2 hours on that, so on and so forth. I kind of felt tonight that even though we were talking about past practices, which was phenomenal, we could have consolidated that more and had more time for questions based on that. And I think we're going to need to spend more time on questions based on current practices than we are going to need a speech about them. For myself personally, I totally get where everyone's coming from, but I would hate to spend time on what somebody is doing on the other side of the lake. I don't want to say that I don't care about that, but what I care about is our beach, our safety, and what we need to do here. I think it's important that we hear about it, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on it.
I think that absolutely would inform what decisions we make about our stretch of beach, though. So I get your point. I think that's fair. Yeah, do we need like formal presentations? I would like to hear more questions and answers too, but I think it's fair to say that current practices on Lake Michigan, whether it's this side of the lake or the other side, is germane to the discussion on what we're going to do here.
That's the standard you're going to be held to.
I understand that, but I guess my point is that I don't want to spend an hour on that and not have some of our questions answered at our level, you know, versus, you know, spending an hour on a presentation. I guess that's my thing. I'm here for information and to get a feel for what we need to do here. I understand that's a broad scope and all of that information comes into play, but I would rather have more time to have specific questions answered than just a large presentation. Just in tonight, I've probably got 60 questions.
Can I address that, Tim? Because that is a great point, Randy. Good. Can I take just a second to address that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Randy, fantastic. No, I'm glad you said that because it reminded me, and I think you're spot on. Just remember that when I opened with what I had to say, my first comment was, does anybody have, since we're talking about past practices, that's the agenda item we're on, does anybody have questions? Because I'm here to answer them. I'm the one guy who did the job out of everybody that's here today, including Adam or anybody else. I'm the one guy on this whole call right now who did the job of past practices 20 years ago when we had lifeguards, and there was crickets. There was not one question. So that's why I jumped into that. And I'll even go one step further to say that since Cam and I went in front of city council over 1.5 years ago now, that's exactly what I offered at the time. Let me tell you what we did and why, so we at least have a baseline and we can go from there. Maybe what we did was horrible. I'm not saying it was good, bad, or otherwise. I'm here to provide information, but I will let you know on the official record, not one city council member, the mayor, or anybody else from the city ever called to ask what we did and why, or to ask one single question about what we did, why the lifeguard program got shut down, what we did when we had it going. There was no question. So I love your idea that, you know, questions is the way to go, because I think that's going to help you inform your decision on what we should do. And that is literally all I've been asking for 1.5 years now. And would you believe I have not received one call, even since I've been on this committee, and I'm the only one that's been a lifeguard at this beach. I have not received one call or one question, including the city, who's reached out to other lifeguard programs or the chief or the chief of the fire, I've not received one question that I haven't precipitated the meeting with about what we used to do. And I have to ask you, why is that? Is it because we've already got a preconceived notion that lifeguarding is not the way to go? And if so, I ask why. Is this truly a committee to look at all options? So that's my only answer is I love your idea. I don't know why there's no questions then.
Well, I don't think you can question, everybody here tonight is interested in what everybody else has to say about beach safety. So I don't think anybody is not questioning. It's just maybe this is a new topic to them. You lived and breathed it, right?
Right, but I agree. But I mean, I was chomping at the bit to talk lifeguards 2 months ago, and I got shut down several times by you directly, Tim. And I get it, that's your job. I know you're trying to keep it on topic, and I appreciate that. You got a tough job.
Well,
But
we got an agenda to follow. You wanted to start right out with the lifeguards, and knowing that was the largest topic, we had some easier ones to hit first to get this committee to gel and communicate with one another.
I
And
know. I'm just saying questions
if you
for that.
come at it too forceful and hard, you catch more flies with honey, right?
I know.
Okay.
I've been told that
So
once or
we're
twice.
into it.
I
And this is
appreciate
a meaty topic. I won't say this is short-term rental meaty, but it's still meaty.
I know. I know.
So are we aligned, Tim, then on the cadence and the next meeting's agenda?
I think what we got to do, so everybody can plan for these things, March 25th, April 22nd, and we should be able to wrap up by May 20th if all goes well. And what we'll have to do is, whoever's going to speak about current standards or however we're going to approach that, we need to say, all right, 1, 2, 3 people are going to speak about current standards, and we're going to limit the time to, let's say, an hour or hour and a half. And then the last half hour would be for questions for this committee. And then I guess if we had time left over, then we could open it up to the public. But I was writing down tonight when we took public comments or questions, and that ate into the 2-hour time limit pretty hard. So, and I don't want to limit public questions or comments, but we do only have so much time to be together at each of these meetings. So,
Tim, if you want current standards, then since the city didn't provide anything, and again, they provided some stuff as far as the insurance folks that were going to come talk and a few other things. But if you want to talk current standards as far as pay, I mean, all the things that matter, right? If we're talking about money, we want to know how much do other places pay and why. And we want to talk about their training standards. And, something that was brought up in the public forum as well as in front of the city is, are there lifeguards out there to even hire? Are we going to stand up a lifeguard program? We got nobody to hire. We've got experts out there that can answer all those questions. So do we want to, in fact, reach out to the same folks that the city reached out to and have them present that info? Because it's there. Half of them are on the call tonight.
right. And that's the question for this committee. And as a reminder, I'm just filling in gratis, and I don't have a vote on this committee, right? So you guys gotta tell me what you want to do for the next meeting. I'm just giving you my opinion, what I think would work.
I agree with you. And Sean and I are in regular contact with a lot of these people who are running programs right now and have that knowledge. I think between Sean and I, we could work with Kate to set up an agenda within the agenda to address current standards, if that makes sense to everybody.
As a committee member, my big thing for the next meeting, especially in this first presentation, would be on the current standards for any of the communities doing this. Yes. What are the costs involved? What is the the steps of lifeguards, being from the new guy to the seasoned vet, what are they paying right now per person? And then I think we need to be within our community. How many do we think we really need? Number one. Yeah. And I think that has to be said before we can even ask a question, because that's going to tell us what the dollars and cents are. And what are the ideal hours? Because one of my questions has been all night, when we talk about incidents in the water, you know, how many of those have happened past 7 o'clock at night? You know, in the last years. I don't know that answer. That's something I'm looking for information too. You know, maybe, and I guess we'll know that from other communities, but you know, is it just a 9 to 6 thing? Or do we really need to staff it longer? Hopefully we can get some of that information. But I think those are the key things, you know, and again, like you said, Sean, what are people, my big thing is as an employer myself, finding people.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's a huge thing right now. And what is the actual likelihood of being able to fully staff this and do it? Those are the questions that I have.
Kate, is there a way that we can?
And what I'd like to do is, I think that we can work with Jill, I think O'Brien with Silver Beach, as well as the New Buffalo folks. Both of them have lifeguard programs. I can see, arrange for them to come up and talk with us on that, as well as see if we can get some statistics on when incidences happen and those kind of breakdowns. We can work on getting that for you at the next meeting for current expectations. I'm sorry, current.
Hey, Kate.
Standards.
Probably the other thing you guys want to look at, I would guess, Sean was talking about how many lifeguards there were per beach in the past. And our beaches, do they have any, are they a different size than they used to be? Have we expanded them? Have they retracted? Or are they all the same? If there were going to be lifeguards, would it be the whole area, partial area as compared to prior? And then we have to say, all right, if you have a 2-man team, what's the radius the 2-man team covers? You know, how many linear feet of beach is that? And then I think you do it in prices in that way. You say, okay, you got 2 guys that cost this, and then you can just multiply it by however many you need. And I think that'll help this committee at the next meeting be able to draw down towards a decision by the time we conclude in May.
I sent something out regarding what we used to do as a baseline, so you guys can plus it up or minus it to know what we did. And I can certainly answer questions to that. But Tim and Randy in particular, and answer your question about asking questions. What do you think if all of us take time, since we can't meet prior to a month and there's a lot of time between now and then, what if we take the next week to come up with the information that we want to gather, whether it's 10 or 20 questions, we can send it to Kate, she can consolidate it with her staff. But what questions we want to know about the current programs, cost, hiring practices, how, you know, do you have difficulty hiring folks? Who are you hiring? Ages, whatever it is, right? Whatever those questions are about their program, let's go ahead and have those ready, right? And then we can send them out. And I'm glad to head this up. It doesn't have to be the city staff because I know some of these folks in particular, and they're not cherry picked. These are guys that have approached the city. Actually, just so you know, every one of the folks that I've talked to are ones that the city reached out to that I didn't even know about. I didn't know the city was reaching out to these folks, but then they then reached out to me to talk to me about what's going on. And they would be more than happy to answer those questions, like pre-questions. And if we do that and give each one of them, let's say 10 minutes to cover their program and answer the questions that you have, and then give another 10 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever for the committee members to then ask questions that might be just, hey, I just thought of something else I wanted to know. And to give you equal time, Randy, for exactly what you're saying, because I have a sense that you have fantastic questions of, hey, why 9 to 6 at night or 9 to 7? You know, why are we doing that? Or what are you doing? I think that might be a way to go. And the only other thing I want to say, since I have the floor, is also just be very careful when you start looking at statistics of when these drownings happen, because that, again, is only a small fraction, although it's the biggest reason why we're doing this, right? Again, the Sue Chambers of the world who lost a grandson is heartbreaking. But keep in mind, there's infinite numbers of other things that lifeguards are doing that effectively make our town better, right? They're ambassadors. So I just want to make sure that it's not just focusing on that one piece.
Sean, your conspiratorial comments regarding the staff bother me. I think they're entitled to do that. And I don't know, this sense of entitlement that you are coming across as having is really troubling to me, okay? I just want to let you know that. We're all working for a common cause. The city staff, I don't believe, is working against what you are advocating here. I'm at least trying to keep an open mind. I know you don't have an open mind. You've got what you want to do. The city staff is entitled to gather information too, and should not be accused by us of not sharing things. That just doesn't fly with me.
I don't think we're moving in a good or productive motion at this point. Honestly,
Well,
Tim, I think we're at a point where we can talk about the next meeting and set those things up.
Then I think you need to change your tone.
Noted.
All right, so I'm gonna take over again. And so March 25th, current standards, the intent would be to have some sort of synopsis outline of what beaches that have lifeguards are doing. Kate suggested she's going to contact, was it Michigan City and Silver Beach, correct?
New
And
Buffalo.
in New Buffalo, okay. So that'd be pretty decent comparable. Does everybody agree with those locations as a comparable?
What are
That's
the,
fair.
I'm sorry, what are the two beaches?
New Buffalo and Silver Beach.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, we need to be on board with this, or at least the majority of us. So that way
No,
you,
it's just, I
that way
don't
you
know
trust
much
the
about.
data that's coming in, right? And then I think that's it. That'll be our next meeting. And then, like I said, hopefully we can have some sort of presentation and comparison data for an hour, no more than an hour and a half, and at least have a half hour for questions from this board or committee, not really board, committee. And then we'll see where we're at the end of the next meeting. And hopefully we're able to go through it. And if not, then the April 22nd meeting will be a follow-up to the next one. So it might 3 to 4 meetings, but hopefully we can get this wrapped up in 3, make some recommendations and move on. Oh, and if you guys wanted to, like I said, we could comb through the prior meetings we've had, the types of consensus ideas we thought did come to the top, and maybe for the first 10 minutes hit those and make some recommendations, and that those can go right off to city council.
That sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, I can prepare those for the next meeting. And did you also want to put in the winter standards in the next meeting too, or the following meeting?
With the what?
The winter standards that Tom Stedman brought up?
Oh, yeah, that'll have to be part of the current standards, because that'll go with hours of operation.
Okay, I'll get them in there.
So I think that is worth discussing or exploring. I'm guessing we're gonna have 4 meetings, but hopefully not.
The suggestion that we submit questions, are we going to do that? And if we're going to do that, who should we submit them to?
Tom, why don't you just go ahead and submit them to me, and I'll collate them and then submit them to our 2 guest presenters for our next meeting. So that way that you'll get the responses from both those existing beaches and their lifeguard programs that they can answer.
Your volume went way down, so we should submit them to you, Kate?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, everybody good with where we're at right now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what I'm looking for is a motion to postpone item 4A2 through 6, I believe, until the next meeting. So basically, you're just saying we're gonna put off the rest of the agenda items until the next meeting.
Right.
I'll
make
submit a motion to postpone. Sorry, Randy.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, is there support?
I'll support.
Second.
Okay. So we'll do a quick roll. Any other discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll just do a quick roll call on that to postpone all the rest of the agenda to the next meeting.
Pam Doherty,
Present.
is that a yes? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Tom Renner,
Yes,
Randy Van Wynen,
Yes.
Sean Russell,
Yes.
Randy Timmer,
Yes.
Tom Stegman.
Yes.
Okay, now I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Hey, Tim, before you do
Yeah.
that, I see you've got a couple of hands up in the audience. Do we have time for those or no?
It's 8:30. We're a half hour beyond our 2-hour limit, so that's why we do the postponement. I mean, if they have some comments, they can easily email them into us and we
Okay,
can include it, as part of getting ready for the next discussion. But at this point this evening, I think we're done for now.
okay. They can submit them kind of to the record or something, I guess?
Yeah,
Is that how
absolutely.
that-
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Second,
Okay, it's been moved by Randy, supported by Sean to adjourn. Any other discussion? Seeing none, call the roll again, please.
Tom Stegman,
Yes.
Randy Van Wynen,
Yes.
Tom Renner,
yes.
Randy Timmer,
Yes.
Sean Russell,
yes.
Pam Doherty.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for attending this evening, and look forward to seeing you on March 25th.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Tim. Thank you, everybody, for your
Have a
time.
good night.
Take
Appreciate it.
care.